Give my best to Mr. Crane and Mr. Curlin. I know you're in touch with, and
I certainly will.
I'm looking forward to getting your take on things. It seems we could educate people to some realities of Islam. We want to talk about the new book. And,
yes, I hope so.
Welcome very, very much to conversation. It's a pleasure, distinct pleasure, to welcome to the program M.Ali Chaudry. He's a Ph.D. He's teaching a course on Phoenix, and he's also got a very illustrious business career that goes back over a long period of time of great responsibility in that realm. And he's also maybe most directly concerned with what we're going to talk about today. He's the president of a very interesting organization called the Center for Understanding Islam. Very important subject. And he's also involved with the Interfaith Network of North America, which speaks a very good ecumenical outreach of people. And it's so good to see you, Ali. Welcome once again very much.
Well, thank you for having me again, Harold.
My pleasure. We went last time. We had a program, in fact, we're airing now on the 9th, and a program we did with you is going to be re-aired tomorrow, the 10th, that we did a couple of years ago, where we went into considerable depth of your background at AT&T and so forth. Maybe we can touch a little bit on that, but then we want to get to things Islamic, and I know you have a new book coming out.
Yes.
And so forth. And then we're in the middle of the whole world being roiled by an economic, economic questions.
A crisis of confidence, as we said. Yes.
Exactly, all of that. And so all of that we're going to talk about. But maybe you could, in a real brief kind of way, go over your background a little bit.
Sure.
And then we'll get into these other issues that are more contemporary to this particular program, since a lot of those other ones we covered in the one that's going to air tomorrow as you and I talk now.
Sure.
But please, your own background a little bit.
Well, you may recall that I came to the United States in 1967 and started working for AT&T. And actually, I was hired full-time in 1968. So I spent the next 30 years working in the Management Sciences Division, in corporate planning, strategic planning, and eventually became the chief financial officer of a division of AT&T.
Very responsible job.
And and during that time, published several articles on productivity, on efficiency, on corporate planning. And since then, I have switched to the academic world. I have taught at various universities. I continue to teach online for the University of Phoenix, as you mentioned. That's a course in economics that I teach. In addition, I have just taken on a responsibility at Rutgers University as part of the Center for Executive Leadership in Government.
Very interesting.
And we are going to be doing a project, one of the professors at Rutgers and myself will be working with the National Management Institute of Egypt to help them develop a training program for their government officials. So I'm going to be spending a good part of next year doing that, and then also teaching at Rutgers Business School.
Very good.
Teaching finance and teaching economics.
Very good. Finance and economics. Very accurate.
That's my area, yes.
Yeah, right. Yes. That's very interesting. And you were also mayor of a town out there.
I was mayor of Bernards Township, popularly known as Basking Ridge. Yes, I served on the township committee, typically called a council, for 6 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
In fact, I was elected just less than 2 months after 9/11, November of 2001.
Yeah.
And I was re-elected in 2004, and I served as mayor in 2004. I, in fact, became the first Pakistani-born Muslim to become a mayor of any town in America.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you're from Pakistan, correct?
Yes, originally from Pakistan.
Yeah,
yes.
right. Okay, that's very good. That's a very good, quick bio on that. And then you're now doing this work, and I wonder maybe you could. Maybe we could address briefly then this thing. We're in the middle of this financial crisis of the world. I wonder maybe you could add some of your thoughts on the source of the trouble that's roiling the entire world now, and your prognostication with date certain when we're going to be out of all this, because we need that and we don't have it. But maybe that's not possible.
I wish I had a crystal ball.
Yes,
that's clear.
I know. I'm just making a joke.
Which I do not.
I'm making a joke. But then we do want to get on to things about Islam, because there's a lot of understanding that's needed over there by the Americans. But share your own view of this current crisis.
Well, in my view, as an economist and as someone who has studied, history, economic history of nations, I feel that the crisis of confidence that we are facing is it was triggered by the housing crisis. But the fallback mechanisms that we had, the safety nets that we had in the past, where institutions would come in and actually rescue a market like that and give it time to recover, just collapsed. And I believe the reason they collapsed is that with the extensive deregulation, now I, as an economist, do believe that markets should be free, businesses should be making decisions in the best interest of their customers, of their employees, their investors. But I think what has happened as a result of the extensive deregulation of many sectors, especially the financial sector, allowed people to create instruments and made them so complex and so difficult to understand that people making decisions for acquiring an asset really didn't understand them.
A lot of that would have to do with what they call swaps and derivatives.
Swaps and derivatives and all of these things that got created. So you had these layers upon layers of uncertainty which people did not understand.
If I may, as a citizen and a layman and everything, I know a lot of people in the banking industry, and they would told me that if they didn't have a banker didn't have a derivatives clause in a contract, they might be sued for malpractice, and that the derivatives process was something to deal with the various levels of risk, particularly like currency exchange and those kind of things, in order to be, it's a kind of assuring against risk in a system that doesn't have an adequate system for taking those things into account.
That is true, but I think what has happened is that the risks that people thought they were managing were not clearly understood. And the instruments they created became commodities that people could buy and sell, and they considered them as assets. So banks and investment banks as well as commercial banks began to hold those as assets. So when the underlying real asset, the housing, for example, or other businesses, began to fall and began to decline in value, the paper assets that you had no value. And that is why we have a crisis of confidence, because you cannot create the wealth that's necessary to back those up that quickly, unless the market really turns around. And I mean the real market, the physical economic activity has to pick up. Jobs have to be created. People have to be earning income to be able to create more employment and so forth.
I don't want to go way far afield, but I think it's fair to say that the entire system by which the planet operates in a business, finance, economic, and a political realm is being tested by the moment we're in right now.
It is true.
And there are things that are questioning the basic assumptions by which we've organized things and calling for an understanding of that, but also one that could subsume that in something so that major change might come that would make a difference in the way everything operates. Do you feel that moment is here?
I think so. I think if we look at the structure of Western economies or industrialized economies,
or world,
or the world as a whole, banking as an institution was a great breakthrough.
Of course.
For the
capital accumulation.
Exactly. For generating capital and making capital available for investments. It was a great breakthrough in terms of making it possible for the economic wealth to be created. But I think what has happened in the last 2 decades or so.
2 decades only, you think?
I would say especially in the last 2 decades, especially with the financial engineering and the new instruments that have been created.
Are you talking about swaps and derivatives?
Now I'm talking about swaps and derivatives and the collateralized debt obligations. When people took mortgages, they sold them, and they keep recycling
or
them.
The same principles apply in a business operation.
So I feel that here, for example, in economics, we and I think what has happened as a result of that is that people were doing things that were not totally transparent. They were not well understood by people, even those who thought that they had a very good handle on it and they were benefiting from it. This sort of brings me back to the basic principle that Adam Smith talked about.
I want to talk. It's worth talking about these things at the level, it's arcane, of economic theory. Because the economic theory really does inform the political and sociological reality in which we live.
And in fact, it is very
down to earth. It's important to get it down.
It is very simple.
And you teach that.
Well, let me just talk about that. We actually talk about that in my classes when teaching economics. We talk about the free enterprise. And the crux of the free enterprise is what we call the invisible hand. That is, Adam Smith wrote about the invisible hand, meaning that if individuals make choices in their best interest that as a whole, if everyone did that, as a whole, society would make the right decisions with respect to where resources get allocated, and therefore we would create the most wealth in doing that. But I believe that Adam Smith not only meant that what you do is in your best interest, that it is legally, not only legally correct, but it has to be ethically correct. And
morally,
I believe, and morally
even
correct.
morally corrupt.
And I believe that this is where there has been a breakdown.
Okay, now
I believe there is a violation of the ethic, the ethic principles in business, which has created many of these problems.
We'll want to get to that, but I'm saying, because you said the last 20 years or something has been something, and then we went back to Adam Smith.
Yes.
And if we go to Adam Smith, there's some history there, because that's 1776,
exactly.
Wealth of Nations, by a moral philosopher, setting out the ground rules for what was like to become. It was destined to take account of the fact we were moving from a feudal, agricultural-based thing to an industrialized world, to a market economy within an industrializing world, which had not been characteristic of the past.
Sure.
And it's worth ticking off, if I may,
worth
ticking off a few of those, because we had a follow-up very closely with Ricardo, with his idea of comparative advantage. And we had Alfred Marshall, we had Karl Marx had a view of economics, reality.
Sure.
We had Lord John Maynard Keynes.
Exactly, right.
We had Van Hayek. We had Van Mises. We have Friedman.
Right.
And we have all of these, and those are systems that have been economic theory have been talking about for a long time. So all of those kind of things are being taken into account, and it might be that the presumptions of the reality within the context coming out of history has been perhaps qualitatively changed, where there's something new needed beyond what the total understanding which we get from that economic theory is called for. Do you think?
And I agree with you. And I think
you do agree with that.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a major premise.
It is major because I think the distinction, though, will be that I believe you look at all of these economic philosophers, or what we call them sometimes the worldly philosophers.
Well, that's Mr.
Friend Hayek and others.
No. I'm thinking of the writer, the famous writer who wrote the book, the
Worldly Philosophers.
That was. It'll come to me. The famous guy, Robert Heilbroner.
Right, Heilbroner. Yes,
yeah, he was a marvelous guy.
At the New School, actually.
Yeah, marvelous. He summarized them all.
He hired me into the New School.
Did he?
To teach
he was a
econometrics.
Wonderful gentleman.
Yes.
And a brilliant scholar.
Great scholar.
Yeah.
So my point was that all of the philosophers talked about and assumed that there was underlying economic activity that created the wealth. What has changed, I believe, and this is my view in terms of where I think the wheels have sort of fallen off, is that we created these instruments that were so far removed from the economic activity.
Now, you're talking about in the last 20 years or so. You're wanting to bring it there without taking a wider sweep. Okay.
That's right. That's what I'm talking about.
You're saying that.
Because those changes actually began to take place. Maybe you could go back a little bit more, but I would say in the last 2 decades, 3 decades perhaps, there has been a significant change in how we began to focus on creating wealth, which was based on these instruments that did not, as closely relate to the economic. We forgot about creating jobs.
Well, okay.
We created financial instruments on which people could, you could sell options, you could buy, you could sell, and make wealth.
That's how Mr. Soros made all his money.
A lot of people have created wealth that way.
On currency exchange, because you can't make a contract if you're trading at 1 to 10 and it goes 1 to 30.
Right.
It's going to make a total difference in your old contract, and you have to associate for that. And the system doesn't have built into something that would take account of these fluctuations.
It couldn't put brakes on it.
That's just a currency trading.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, Adam Smith was born into a world that there was no manufacturing of any real places. It was all changed. There was no real industrialization. They invented the steam engine, and there was a lot destined to do. But he was born into a world as a moral philosopher and economic theorist, foundationally, into a world that has changed tremendously since 1776.
That's very true. I think in practice we have to recognize.
And one of the things that has emerged is that there's increased industrialization. There's increased use of technology and extended consciousness that is embodied in technological instruments and manufacturing. There was no mass production. There was none of the things that characterize the modern economy.
Yeah.
And those things, and are they wrong at a basic level in terms of what the future requires and maybe newly allows in terms of a sociological, political, and economic ordering? One characteristic of all those I ticked off is it's generally informed by a labor theory of value. The Marxists call it a surplus labor theory of value, that all value or all wealth is created by human labor. And we distribute all income in the United States. The basic policy, grounding policy statement is the Employment Act of, more recent, the Employment Act of 1946. And it's implied that we are going to distribute wealth, we're going to distribute income out of the wealth to the people en masse through their having a labor relationship to production, and we've reified the value of labor's input to production. Is that more or less comport with your sense of reality? So that the way people have to get income, with few exceptions, the capital assets are very narrowly held by a small group, 5%. And so forth, and those instruments are, in some Rand Corporation's things, they are really responsible for the real production, maybe up in the 90th percentile now, owned by a small group, and the masses have only to get a job within the system owned by a few, like a feudal duke in the feudal estate with serfs, and that they're going to distribute income to them through their labor, and they're going to have what they call a job and employment.
Well, I believe that's part of the problem. I think with that construct.
That is. And then one last little addendum.
Yes.
We want to relate all of this, perhaps, in a way that's very interesting, to Islam.
Yes.
As a major force of 1.8 billion or 6 billion people in the world who maybe have introducing an alternative to the collective result of the economic theory that has come out and informed the political process in a way that is significant in terms of unifying or liberating in a certain way the whole human potential for the whole human society.
Well, let me say this, that this labor value and
labor theory of value
and the role of capitalists, it is all well understood. And I completely understand the disparity now that exists in terms of the ownership of the productive assets.
Always has.
Okay, it has been, but I think it has been probably brought to a point where, you're feeling, as you say, now people can only expect to earn a living or create wealth through holding a job. I would say that...
And their input to production is less and less relative to capital instruments through time, to where 10% in Adam Smith's time was something other than labor. Now it's only about 10% of actual production is labor, and yet we distribute to the people only through a labor relationship and keep the ownership of the technology.
So this is where I would differ, because I believe that I think in this case, what is missing is that the ownership of assets is so concentrated in few hands that it does create a very serious imbalance. Secondly, I think what has happened is that in the last few decades, and especially with these instruments about currency trading and the swaps and so forth that we talked about, speculation became a much bigger factor.
Well, we had tulip things and everything going on, didn't we, back in the 17th century?
We've had those situations, but this is so pervasive that people made money. They really thrived on speculation, and that's how they made most of their wealth. And
George Soros
and many others who have made billions, as opposed to, for example, if you take Bill Gates, who created real economic activity, and that sort of brings me back to the role of technology. Sure, the production process has changed dramatically to the point that we now have countries specializing in a whole sector of manufacturing. For example, we are no longer manufacturing as many goods as we used to. We are doing a lot of knowledge creation. a
We
lot of
being
new
the United States, yeah.
United States, because I think we still
You were at
lead.
AT&T. That was
and I believe America still leads in that. New ideas, new R&D and so forth. But we're no longer doing the production. So it seems to me that what needs to happen is that if we're going to train our workers, first go educate them, give them the best skills in math and in science and in writing.
That's what Mr. Friedman
Communication is very important.
Mr. Friedman says we should be doing that in spades.
Absolutely, absolutely. But we also have to have activities that they get engaged in with respect to production, rather than just getting involved with it in a remote fashion. We have, for example, energy. Green energy is a major field that I believe America could lead the world. But getting back to the question of
the actual production,
right? That you got to have productive activity, and this is where I think the notion in Islam of everything being based on your hard work, but also Islam recognizes ownership of capital, ownership
Thank you
of
very
property.
much. We don't recognize that here.
Absolutely. And it says that people who, in fact, one of the things that I did at AT&T for many years, to talk about the role of not only just labor in producing wealth and productivity, but capital.
Yes.
And even materials that we buy from others that have innovation built into those, so that they are making it possible for us to reduce cost and improve productivity. It used to be called multi-factor productivity, if you might remember. So you have to recognize capital, labor, as well as other...
We don't recognize capital. I mean, in a sense, as far as the people are concerned.
Yes.
We only recognize them as having a labor input to production, but the ownership of the technology is narrowly held, like there was the aristos in feudal Europe.
Well,
they're narrowly held by a tiny group, and we're going to distribute, and they are increasingly responsible for production. And they do of actual things that are relative, creating value and so forth. And they're owned by maybe 5% of the population. And the people don't even think about there should be some alternative way for them to get income. So that Lord Keynes say we have to have demand to buy and clear the market. If they're not going to have the income to buy. And Lord Keynes also warned against technological displacement of labor en masse about this time. He said it was when it was going to happen. And so we don't have a system. Most people don't even think about getting income by anything other than having a job or a career.
That's right. And that's why in Islam we are encouraged to engage in business. So when it comes to investing, for example, we are told not to invest in speculative ventures. Speculation is strongly discouraged. And also, if you want to enter a business, rather than taking interest, as we were talking earlier before the program began, usually, or taking interest or charging interest, that you engage in partnerships.
They try.
Where you own,
they try.
And many institutions have been created in certain Muslim countries where they've tried Islamic banking and so forth, but not necessarily successful and not always completely true to the spirit. They've sort of in some cases gotten around it.
Thank you. Well, they've done that in Islam, but they've done it in spades in the Western economy.
That's right.
Because all of our spiritual leaders, whether it's Moses or Jesus or Buddha or whatever, they've all have prescription against the concept of usury
and exploitation.
And exploitation. That's another issue. But just directly on the question of interest, we've gotten around that in the West because it's so efficient way in order to get a process moving. We've gotten around that, and the only block of humanity that seems to be trying to hold on to, and that's 1.5 billion people, Islam, in some quarters of Islam, some people go along with it, the pattern that's being done, is Islam, that have this proscription against usury or interest, and they would try to have it be by, as you say, partnerships where the people could have an ownership not only of their labor, but also of capital assets as a way of distributing income.
Exactly.
Now, that's a huge differentiation that ought to be drawn.
It is.
And it may be why so many people vested interest in the Western model are attacking now. It used to be commies that we would attack, or communists. We're now attacking Islam.
Yes. And that is very unfortunate.
Because they are a possible threat in a serious political arrangement to the basic premises under which all our economic philosophers have
some
informed our
people
political system, and our system may be under threat.
Some people perceive that as a threat. But you see, we weren't even talking about that kind of a threat, ideological or based on principles. The threat really grew out of the post 9/11 events and the conflicts that have been created actually in the last 6 decades, probably, when the political realities have changed and people have created those conflicts. So people are now responding. Some Muslims have now taken up a cause, and they're using Islam simply as an excuse.
Well, there are people like you. Yeah, go ahead.
So my point is that those people have perceived or real grievances that they want to address, or issues with certain foreign policy initiatives and so forth. But it shouldn't be labeled as Islam as being the threat.
Well,
and that's one of the things that I'm trying to avoid. And I like when John McCain talks about Islamic extremism and so. There is nothing Islamic in extremism. There's nothing Islamic in terrorism. There are some Muslims who have acted as terrorists, who have committed terrorist acts, and they should be treated as such, just like any other,
like criminals.
So I think one of the things that we
absolutely make
as
that
a part
distinction.
of the work,
I'm talking about serious scholars.
So now
and some with political clout that could have a real effect upon the way the world is operated, rather than just going along with the lead of the Western powers.
Even in this case,
they're out of date with what the future requires. There may be leadership coming from scholarly places within the Islamic world that keeps faith with the traditional Islamic values rather
you
than
can still
attacking
do
them.
that and still be able to grow. My point is that that's one of the things that people are learning. That now, isn't it ironic that one of the largest shareholders of Citigroup is a Muslim?
Is that, I didn't know it was true?
Yeah, Walid bin Talal.
Well, it might be some.
He's a very large. I don't know whether he's the largest, but he certainly holds a very large stake.
All those sovereign funds.
Sovereign funds that are holding it and so
incredible,
forth. So they are investing in American businesses. People who are making money and are engaged in and so forth.
I'm thinking more about the scholarship that's holding on to the principles that are trying. Mohammed Faisal is the fourth son of Ibn Saud, was set up an Islamic bank. They're trying to hold on to the basic principles from an ethical and moral perspective that is against usury. Our whole thing is built upon usury and upon interest, and that's the whole model that will be attacked at a philosophical, moral level by Islamic scholars, not necessarily political.
That's right. Islam does not Islam does not allow usury, because usury is, in fact, it is so unfair to the people who have to depend on credit, who cannot, because the bank.
And we've gotten around that. We've gotten around that in the Western world.
But really we haven't. In this case, for example, why have we not gotten around? Why have we gotten this crisis right now? We have a crisis because people held mortgages that they couldn't afford.
Well, that's
and it was the interest that went up. Like, as soon as the interest went up, they couldn't make payments anymore.
Yeah, but that's to be prescribed by our moral principles.
My point is that was forbidden. That should have been, should not have been.
But it isn't in the West.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So my point is that it came to a point where the system just broke down.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They got around the prescription against usury.
Yeah, right. But that sort of shows the weakness of it. Okay? So my point is
that the Western leading model that tries to be legitimate for the world.
Exactly. So my point is that if we now go back to the Islamic principles that, for example, in fact, somebody wrote in the Financial Times, and I don't remember the name of the gentleman, about 6 months ago, when Archbishop of Canterbury had made a suggestion that some Sharia laws should be allowed to be promulgated in certain courts, like, for example, family matters, inheritance, those kinds of issues. That's what he was talking about. And he was taken to task by everybody. Everybody was criticizing him. How come you do that?
Sharia only means they're going to cut off your
Exactly. That's the only thing they understand.
That's political manipulation.
Exactly. That is not the essence of Sharia. But unfortunately, that's the perception that people created. And in fact, he wrote that had Sharia laws been followed in the financial transactions
of the world
that we were dealing with, we would not have this crisis.
I think that's probably some truth to that. Yeah,
so the point is, because there will be constraints. There will be automatic constraints to say, no, you cannot speculate. You cannot build these house of cards that is going to literally fall down.
And the Islam recognizes private property. And
Islam recognizes private property.
So that's what the West has been fighting
deal of
over.
Emphasis.
If I may, the West has been fighting the politically normal, the normal society of political leaders and so forth, and then let's say the socialists or something. They identified the institution of private property as the evil institution that creates inequity. And so they wanted to do away with private property like they tried in the Soviet Union or something.
No, Islam
not a good idea.
Islam respects private property and protects it, but it forces through its own system. For example, the institution of zakat, which is the charity to be given. 2.5% of the wealth at the end of each year to be given to charity, so that it could then be used to help those who are less fortunate, who are needy, and who cannot support themselves. If you had that kind of a system, then you would have the resources to deal with that. And that's why, and that was in fact the first social security system that was created 1,429 years ago.
It's getting some whiskers. It's getting some age.
Think about that.
Yeah.
So the point is that can you imagine if you just take 2.5% of the wealth of Bill Gates or all of these people,
and compound that
at the end of each year, and put that into a zakatul mal, as we call it, as a fund that is to help the poor. There you could do that. Then, but people would be given jobs. They will be given opportunity to earn and be in business.
Okay. Well, let me ask you there at the minute. I mean, because it'll be done again. Back to this idea of the fact that you say you're going to give them jobs.
Yeah.
We just reflectively think the only way to get income to people, well, you got two ways, don't you?
Or
if you're an associate,
you
can tax.
Yeah.
You can tax wealth and then distribute it according to need. That's what Marx said. Let's distribute the need. We got a capability growing and so forth. We can distribute according to need through a governmental system.
That's true. Right.
And that can be done and so forth. In fact, we could do away with the private sector because it's only the labor creating the wealth and that kind of thing. So they got down to that. But they don't. But we just reflect. Even Mr. Obama, who's probably going to win the election handily, I believe now.
It looks like it. Yes.
It looks like that and everything. I mean, the only way he says that we're going to be able to get things going is to create jobs for people.
Well,
now, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's adequate to what the future requires.
I agree with you. I think
why don't we distribute some alternative that involves both private sector and public sector? Public sector has the ability to tax, spend, and regulate. Private sector has the ability to produce private, profit and so forth. And the private sector have the both, but then have a system that's going to distribute some ownership of the technology to the people as an income distribution system so that they can clear the market. They will have the money to buy rather than being employed. We only say we've got to get jobs.
Harold,
the jobs are being eliminated in the long run beyond outsourcing.
Right.
They're being eliminated, as Mr. Keynes said, and we still only think we're going to create jobs by giving them education in that line.
But the jobs
that
I'm thinking of,
what the future requires.
Exactly. The job that I'm thinking of and what Islam advocates is creating businesses. People should be going into businesses for themselves or creating employment opportunities for others.
Again, employment.
See,
why don't you?
But the point is, you have to have the resources that to create the wealth. You got to have people to work. You got to have capital. You got labor, and you got others. Other resources to come in.
Number one on that should not be the labor. When you're talking about the people, you're going to create a job for people. Not that. You should be creating a system that's going to finance. You're going to get capital accumulation on things that can be invested in good product.
Right.
You're going to allow good business decision-making, feasibility, all that stuff, including insurance built in.
Right.
But then you're going to disseminate ownership of that to the people as a way for them to get income apart from what they do.
I agree with you.
I make the point only because that's the only thing that's brought up in the political dialect, and we need something different, and that's why we have the problem with the the financial problem now is this adherence to the labor theory of value and the acceptance of the people that the only way they can have it's okay for the guy on the hill to get overwhelmingly rich by owning assets that are producing wealth.
Right.
We don't want that. That's only for them. We're going to stick to our sweeping the ground.
No, I agree with you.
You understand?
No, I agree with
That's
you.
the major thing. And then in order to have that, you have to have a way of insuring against risk.
Exactly.
Within the business process. We don't have it in place. So those people doing derivatives and stocks and things within the bank, the system in place is not adequate to what the future requires when those investments that are going to be income source for the masses rather than their employment only.
But, yeah, exactly.
It has to be sure. It can't be a crapshoot like Wall Street.
No, and the only way it can be sure. The only way it can be sure is if more people own the capital.
Thank you. Okay. Not they own the right to go out and do a job for somebody who owns the capital.
That's right.
They become the owner of the capital.
Exactly.
And you do
what
believe
has
that.
happened?
And that comports with Islam?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
They got a private property right, and the reason they get income coming has nothing to do with what they do.
And to cooperate in business, to start a business. In fact, there is so much written, even in the Quran, directly talking about doing business. You should have written contracts, and you must honor your contracts.
Yes.
And when it comes to paying people, by the way, the Prophet Muhammad is quoted to have said, that you must pay the wages of the person before the sweat on their back dries.
Okay.
That means people are entitled to, those who are working for you, working with you, and so forth. Whether you are a partner or a worker, they must get their share, and you must honor your contract.
I know you're involved with this thing. You got a thing coming. You got a book coming out. I'm looking forward to that. You and Dr. Crane. He's very good.
Yes, he's excellent. Yes.
And you got that coming out and everything. But you know, I've been in Libya. And I really am taken with the country of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. I don't know. He was thought of as he's coming in out of the cold now.
Yes, he certainly has, yes.
But he is an Islamic person, and he is North Africa, and he is philosophical, and he was very opposed to capitalism. And when you go to Libya, they have signs there, they say, and it's really not a lot of cult things, but they got a thing that says partners, not wage earners. It's the only system I know of where they don't emphasize for the people wages of employment.
Right. Ownership is emphasized.
Ownership is so. If you start a business, the people that make up the business have to be owners of the capital estate base of that business.
Well, that's the comment, that's the thought that I know Bob Crane and I have talked about.
Well, that's a very important concept.
And Norm Kurland has been,
Well, there is that binary economics, and Louis Kelso had this idea. He had it from 1958. That's 50 years ago. You're going to have to set up within the government structure a capital diffusion. Capital diffusion, not labor.
That's
capital diffusion in reinsuring corporation behind a business.
Well, you see, some of that happened when we gave land to people.
The Homestead Act.
The Homestead Act was a deliberate act.
Yeah, but it went right back to the 5% after '69.
Yeah. So I think, by the way, one of the things I wanted to mention before we get into the book is that
we got to get to your book.
Even with respect to the business leaders who have seriously thought about these issues and the weaknesses that we have in the system, adopted a set of rules in 1994.
Oh, yeah,
it's called the Core Roundtable.
That's right. That's a country in Switzerland, a city in
Switzerland
Core,
where they met.
C-A-U.
Right, C-A-U-X.
C-A-U-X.
And where they met, and they adopted 4 basic principles for business leaders to follow. And let me share them with you.
Okay, let's get the group down. CAW is there, and that's where the Oxford group used to meet, and it's a very important progressive center where things come out of CAW.
Yes.
And the group is called again to put this together?
It's just called the Roundtable, CAW Roundtable.
The Roundtable.
Right, CRT
is there a site for them?
Yeah, they have a website that actually spells out.
What is it? It might be worth spelling.
I think it is crt.org.
crt.org.
CRT. In fact, I can give you the full. In fact, there are 4 principles that they adopted.
Okay.
And I think it's worth talking about in the light of what we are discussing.
By all means, you have them in your book. Read them out.
The first principle that they adopted was to say the value of a business to society is the wealth and employment it creates and the marketable products and services it provides to consumers at a reasonable price commensurate with quality. To create such value, a business must maintain its own economic health and viability.
Fair enough.
You have a responsibility to have a business that can be sustained. So all the actions you take must ensure that.
Yeah.
And I think many cases that we have seen, Lehman Brothers and others, I don't believe that they actually took steps to ensure their continued viability. The second principle is businesses have a role to play in improving the lives of all their customers, employees, and shareholders by sharing with them the wealth they have created. And the wealth must be shared. It cannot be hoarded by a few. And especially these executive compensation packages, where you have a ratio of from the lowest paid to the highest paid.
Is that 400
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, 4,000.
Compared with the much lower ratios in Europe and Japan.
Over the last couple,
over the last. Unconscionable. In fact, in the days that I was still at AT&T, we used to talk about the shared economy and the compensation packages and these HR consultants that came out and made all of these absolutely ridiculous packages for CEOs that they will get millions for no work.
Well, it's getting worse
And
every
it
day.
has gotten much worse. And
Although
I think that needs to be stopped.
That may be coming to a screeching halt under the
Hopefully
current
it will.
situation, yeah.
So the third principle they adopted was businesses should recognize that sincerity, this is where it's important, the sincerity, candor, truthfulness, the keeping of promises, and transparency contribute not only to their own credibility and stability, but also to the smoothness and efficiency of business transactions, particularly on the international level.
Okay.
So honoring all of those are extremely important. And the
Yeah.
fourth and last principle is very short. It says businesses should recognize that some behavior, though legal, may still have adverse consequences.
Yeah, morally.
And this is where I was talking about
Yeah.
Adam Smith's invisible
Yeah.
principle works
Yeah.
only if you ensure that all the decisions you make and all the actions you take are not only legally permissible, but they're also ethical.
All right. Now you
Because
got,
if we stick to ethics, then I think we can have an economy that can survive.
well, that would be good if they have that up on every wall. And he was a moral philosopher, Mr. Smith.
Yes.
But he lived in a different time, and people get around that, don't they?
Right.
They get around those prescriptions.
Exactly.
And there seems to be that. I wonder if we could, and very good you're bringing up some things about the Islam, because you're Islamic, and you're aware of that, and you have a site that Mr. Crane, you are involved in.
Yes.
Rodney Shakespeare's been in touch with you.
We have a website, Center for Understanding Islam.
As I understand, we can maybe bring it up.
We can actually bring it up.
Let's see, we've only got
CUII.org.
Let's see if you can get to that, George, if you can. The site that they've set up on the computer, and when they come up, we could talk to that. But it's they'll bring
We
that
set up the first tab.
There
for
we
there
go.
it is,
Here we
yes.
go. Now, what do we got? You talk to this.
So
This is
on
your
that
site.
that website, as you can see, our mission is to present an enlightened understanding of Islam.
Enlightened.
An enlightened
And that's
understanding of
your
Islam
new
in the
book.
light of what we are facing today, the conditions that we face, and yet we can be faithful to Islam in practices and in decisions we make in our own lives and in the lives of the community, that how to do that. And therefore, it is extremely important, and we do a lot of work with respect to interfaith dialogue.
Yes, you do. Good for you. You're reaching out ecumenically.
And we hold workshops to teach people Islam. In fact, I just came away today from the Somerset County Library where I gave a talk to a group on understanding the spirit of Islam.
Okay,
And
good.
we also brought some Islamic art to show them. They were fascinated. So the librarian has asked me to come back and give a whole presentation on the art.
Are you taping those
on
things?
Islamic art.
Why don't you tape those things? Take a camcorder and put them up.
Yes, they're being taped.
They are being taped.
Actually,
Good.
this was being taped by a local cable television station.
Okay, good.
Which will be aired in Somerville.
And,
We also have publications. As you know, we put out a book in 2003 called Islam, Short Answers to Key Current Questions.
Right.
Now, Bob and I, Dr. Crane and I, are working on a much longer book to explain the faith of Islam in one part of the book, and then talk about the civilization, Islamic civilization.
Right.
Because we believe that frequently when people confuse the teaching of the faith with some cultural aspects of a particular Muslim society, it distorts the whole image of Islam. And we are trying to basically counter that by presenting, first of all, what are the basic principles and underlying articles of faith of Islam that people need to understand, and then look at the behavior, the Islamic civilization in which we've had empires, we've had dictators, we've had people who've done wrong things, but that doesn't make them necessarily Islamic.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think we need to, so the book is really based on that, and it was in fact thought that we needed a book like that for college courses, because I found out, as I have been teaching a course at Rutgers, it's a 10-week-long course on understanding Islam and covering all aspects of the basic faith, the practices, the pillars of Islam, history, the role and status of women in Islam, the whole concept of what jihad means.
It's like a spiritual struggle.
And it is a spiritual struggle, absolutely.
Jihad is a spiritual
Jihad, in fact, the greatest jihad is the spiritual struggle with oneself.
Yeah, it's hard to live in a world where it's not right.
Exactly, to do what God really wants us to do, and not to fight, and not to kill, and so forth.
And that's the spirit of Islam.
That is the spirit of Islam. That is what I try to do.
And it's being manipulated by people who have an interest in creating maybe.
Is it? Yeah.
A war of civilizations, Mr. Huntington.
Well, there are people who've talked, but I think that theory has been discredited.
You think so?
Sufficiently discredited that I don't think many people now talk about that.
But don't you think, if you were to say from the standpoint of New York or from the United States, that the enemy du jour is Islam?
Well, people have made it.
You understand?
People have made it
like they used to do with communism.
Yeah, they have made it so. But on the question of
misinterpreted Islam.
Misinterpretation, absolutely.
Right. Okay.
And with respect to the clash of civilization, there have been books now. In fact, at least 2 books that I'm aware of that have come out with the title of Dialogue of Civilizations.
Well, that's a
I just
good
attended.
idea.
I just attended a book signing ceremony held by the World Jewish Congress here in Manhattan, right next to the UN during the UN week.
Yes.
Where a businessman, a very successful, probably one of the few billionaires, Jewish billionaire, who has written this book, The Dialogue of Civilizations.
Okay.
And I attended that with him, and I've got an autographed copy from him.
Good.
And he talked about, he's from Uzbekistan, but he's lived with Muslims all this time. So he's saying that this clash does not make any sense to me as a Jew.
Do you want to mention his name, or do you don't remember? Or,
unfortunately, I don't remember his full name, so I don't want to mispronounce it.
Send me a link, would you?
But I will send you a link to his book, even.
And I'll try and pass it on to the audience.
And his point was, in fact, his point was that he actually talks about, he says he goes out and builds synagogues, but he also builds mosques.
Okay.
He's built one of the biggest mosques in Uzbekistan and in other places where he has gone.
Uzbekistan.
Yes,
yeah,
right.
Tough to do things in
he's a very successful businessman from there.
Yeah.
So my point is, we're working with people like him and others, and actually that was brought together by a group called a Foundation for Ethnic Understanding.
Okay.
Based here in New York, and it's headed by Rabbi Mark Schneier. This is a younger Mark Schneier who is heading that up, and we are working very closely with him in trying to bring Jewish and Muslim communities together to counter Islamophobia, as we were just beginning to talk about how much Islamophobia there is, and also anti-Semitism together. So in fact, November 21st, 2nd, and 3rd, we are going to have events that will be held to bring together mosques and synagogues. Almost 30 different events will take place during the weekend of November 21st to the 23rd.
And do you reach out to Christians like Baptists?
Absolutely. We've had, in fact, we have had many meetings. I have talked to Baptists. I'm talking to Quakers next month.
Quakers would be easy to talk
yes.
to. Yes,
I have spoken to Quakers in Massachusetts.
He was a Quaker.
And so yeah, we reach out to
ecumenical.
We reach out to every community in trying to understand and build these bridges of understanding.
Yeah, right.
But I think this event is very unique because we wanted to sort of focus on this one. And Walter Ruby, who has been working with me on it in the coordination, and I've been trying to help him find mosques here in New Jersey. We've got at least 6 mosques in New Jersey that are going to be working with them. And maybe at this point, if we could get the other website up.
Oh, if we can. What can
that's
do they have
inona.org.
I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. Do they have
he only has a link.
Oh, okay, Okay, get the other website
get
up,
the second tab, if you would, please.
The second tab is what
that is the Interfaith Network of North America that we created. And the idea there was to make people aware of all these interfaith activities that are taking place.
Good.
Its purpose is not to propagate anything, not to do it. It is simply to show that there are these activities. So we made it possible, and I actually helped build this site. And I've gotten Christians and Jews now working with us to expand it.
Good.
So that every organization can list their events on it. People can see that these things are happening so they can take part in it.
They haven't got it up
and we
yet,
think
George.
it's very, very important if
do
you can
do
get
you have that second tab? We can bring up the site. Maybe, George, on the computer, the one that is, what is it again?
It was set up on the computer. It's a www.inona.org. Interfaith Network of North America.
I see. Yeah. Well, they'll try to.
But
get
you
it
can
up.
get it in. You can. You can splice it in.
Yeah.
So I think we are sort of facing a major challenge in trying to dispel these misperceptions that people have. As you know, just
you're talking
recently,
about the civilization.
Well, exactly. That's why we believe there is a need for a dialogue of civilization. Another book that was
Couldn't
published,
agree with you more on that.
that was published by the same title, by the way, was by Gulan. from Turkey.
Here, they've got it.
Okay,
now.
yeah, that website.
That's the site. And
that site, you will see on the website that we are reflecting all faiths. We are encouraging everyone to be a part of it. And if one link goes to the information page, you will see the organization that are members whose events are listed. If you click on the calendar, you can see the events. For example, this week you will see all the events that are listed there.
Good, yeah.
And the month of November will show.
Is this national or is
this
local?
International? It's on the website. We are trying to do it now for the United States first.
You put it together?
We put it together.
Good for you.
And I have volunteers who have
the Center for Understanding
Islam.
Good. Okay.
As a project, we felt it was important for people to know that these things are happening.
Sure.
So more people could take part in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing's more important.
And you can see that, and I'm finding it's so heartening, really, to find people who are reaching out to us and saying, please come and speak to us about Islam and give us a better understanding. So what we have done now is, in addition to giving lectures, I have put together the Center for Understanding Islam has helped put together a small Islamic art exhibit. So I take those pieces of art with me. It's mostly calligraphy. Beautiful prints that we got from Turkey and different places. Some tapestries that I bought from Saudi Arabia last year when I went for Hajj with my wife.
Oh, you did?
Yes, my wife and I went for her. Yes, that was our first time.
Congratulations.
And we had a wonderful experience. So I bought some things from there that we are now showing as a part of that. So that's helping. But at the same time, we find that there are people, unfortunately, in this country who still feel that they have to have this clash. Because, as you said, they have found this convenient enemy. And even in the political circles, they have now found that to be a Muslim is to be something wrong. Well, I'm saying when they say, well, they don't want to associate with Muslims, or they don't want to go to events held by Muslims.
They want to cast the Muslim as the enemy.
As the enemy, which is totally wrong, and it's only counterproductive, because there are more than 6 million Muslims living in the United States.
And it's fast
and growing. Contributing, and fastest growing religion.
And 1.6 billion in the
world as a whole.
1/4 of the world or something. Yeah, right. That's a big bunch of humanity.
In our book, Bob and I talk about some prominent Muslims who have taken major strides and have made contributions to the society as whole. For example, when I was elected as member of the council,
first Pakistani,
first Pakistani to be elected right after 2001, in November of that year, and then I was re-elected 3 years later. So that just shows you that people respect what you, as an individual human being, as an individual American, can do for the community, not what your faith is. And of course your faith informs you in your actions and what you do. And I believe I have tried to live my faith in all of those actions, and people respected that.
And I think people who live their own faith will recognize you're living the faith as something that resonates with their faith.
Absolutely. There are many.
That's a good way for people to get together.
Jews, honestly, in fact, I wanted to mention something to you just yesterday. One of my very dear friend, a rabbi in Morristown, sent me a draft of his sermon that he was going to deliver yesterday as a part of the Rosh Hashanah and now Yom Kippur services.
Right. It's a holiday.
And it is so touching that he actually takes on the issue of Islamophobia. And he's talking to his congregation. And I'm getting his permission to actually post his sermon on our website as soon as it's available. And we are going to do that. Rabbi Don Rossoff wrote Rabbi Don Rossoff, Donald Rossoff from Morristown, Temple B'nai Or, has written a beautiful message that addressing his Jewish congregation and saying, you hear about all these things that Muslims have not condemned terrorism, but they have. Look at this. So he's actually able to use our website and show where that information exists, and that Muslims have done good things. They're important members of this society and so forth, and that we shouldn't be demonizing.
They gave
Just
us
like
algebra.
I would be doing
they
the
gave
same
us the zero, I think.
You have a number of things that came out of science and medicine in general, astronomy in particular, very strong contribution to astronomy. So we are going to be doing the same thing when we go in our own community. We are going to say to Muslims that if you are either listening to anti-Semitic remarks or making anti-Semitic remarks, you need to be aware of what you're doing. Because it is wrong. Against any human being to go and do that.
Well, in a time of crisis, people have a tendency to what they call scapegoat, and they want to find out who's at fault. Like we have a lot of free-floating angst now over this financial thing. It's resonating throughout the world and everything. People, and they really want to find out who was to blame for our insecurity.
That's right.
And it may be at a level of material reality that a lot of that stuff resonates from, and it may be because they don't have, or let's say our political, economic, intellectual leadership has not yet come up with a system that is in a certain way positive or progressively liberating of the human spirit from the nightmare that James Joyce called a history.
Right.
We're coming out of a historical context. There's alterations that are coming, and when there's alteration and change, people are upset because their identities are wrapped up in an outdated system, and the vision is not given to the future, so they're going to try and find somebody to blame.
And it
seems to me there are a lot of people trying to do that with this Islamic culture,
and in fact,
that may contain, at the basic level of material reality, a commitment to a notion of economics, which is really relevant to helping to inform a process of changing the basic presumptions of the economics of the West, let's put it, that will be able to be informative to that, and that change is what's going to be able to usher in an era where the angst is not going to be so
and you see the latest example of this
liberation maybe in the air.
Misrepresentation of Islam and mischaracterization of Islam was done by some group called the Clarion Fund, I think. That they distributed some 28 million copies of this horrible video DVD called Obsession. And now a lot of people, of course, are now writing about it and saying that this is wrong.
Like the Protocols of Zion.
I as a Muslim stood up and spoke of religion on the line against any Muslim even accepting that, because Muslim scholars have said that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was a hoax.
Yeah, of course.
And it should never be propagated.
But people do it.
People do it, unfortunately.
A sense of,
but because of
they found the enemy, and by God, we're going to round those guys up.
Well, see, this is where Quran tells you that because of your anger, don't let your anger and your hate for someone guide you, make you deviate from justice, from the right path. Okay? No matter what it is. So I think even facing this crisis that we are in, we've got to, first of all, be honest with ourselves. And we have to be realistic in terms of what we are facing and how to fix it and what we need to do. And our politicians need to be realistic, that they need to bring the community together, not to take it apart.
Yeah, but bring it together and to help usher in something that is in keeping with what the future requires, and is not grounded on trying to reify the old system that's outdated. We want to get that at a level of transformation that could be liberating, because we still have weapons of we still have weapons of destruction that, if they're unleashed, do you realize that? That they do now mean species lethal?
Exactly.
The modeling?
That's right.
So that's an existential new reality. We may be transcending material scarcity as an ontologic level. That's going to call for changes bigger than when Galileo told us we didn't go around the sun, which upset a lot of people. Paradigm shifting time. So we ought to be open to thinking about something in those veins. And your work is very much along those lines.
Thinking of paradigm shift and things that we are doing locally even. In each community, we believe this is the kind of work that needs to be done. On Wednesday, we just celebrated our end of the month of Ramadan, Eid al-Fitr. October 1st. And we know that the Jewish community had started their Rosh Hashanah the night before. So I invited our local rabbi, Schachter, to come to our prayer. He came with his son. He came with a platter of goodies, and I had him speak before we even started our services.
Wonderful.
He spoke to our community, and we are in fact going to be getting together on November 23rd at his synagogue, Muslims and Jews together, starting this conversation.
Wonderful.
Starting this dialogue.